If you're interested in glowing up, then I'm Celeste Louw, and this is Brave Enough. Let's talk about what it feels like for a survivor living in the fallout of their abuse. I think it's an undercovered topic. And as a survivor myself of child abuse and domestic violence, I need to say that it is a very difficult thing to walk after you leave, or after you've grown up and left your home or your childhood abuse, because the fallout is like tendrils that go through your life and affect every part of you. It's not like there's one incident that you can just work through and it's over. It becomes a very complicated system of things that affect every area of your life. So the first thing to understand is that your body reacts before your logic. So you feel anxious and you feel afraid, or you are in survival mode, or fight, flight, and freeze, and fawn, and all of those different fallouts in your body before it even hits your brain. And so you start living in the past and the present at the same time. And this is a difficult thing because it's hard to recognize in yourself. You don't realize that your fallout is affecting you until it becomes clear to you by either someone else telling you, or because things get so difficult that you have to actually notice that something's not okay with you. So when you're living in the past and the present at the same time, what happens is something that might be safe or should be safe looks dangerous to you. So you'll have triggers that come from smells, from sounds, from places, from all different areas of the things that you experience every day. And because you are constantly on high adrenaline and you are constantly scanning for danger, which is part of the fallout, you see things that are threatening in things that are actually just everyday things. And this creates two problems. So the one problem is that you are exhausted from being on edge and looking for danger all the time and in survival mode all the time. But the other thing is your behavior looks erratic and you don't look like you are rational, because you're not. Because when you are triggered, you're not thinking, you're just reacting, you're not responding. And you might be responding to something that is perfectly normal in everyday life, that feels dangerous to you but isn't dangerous. The other thing is that you might not have a memory attached to that. So what happens when you don't have a memory attached to your trigger is that you'll be afraid of something and not know what it is that you're afraid of, or anxious about something and not know what it is, because you haven't identified what your triggers are. You just know that you feel anxious. And so you're like anxious all the time, but you're not anxious all the time. Something is triggering you. And finding those triggers can be really difficult. I'll give you an example. I have a trigger to ice in a glass. I have no memory of why. I don't know why it scares me. And even to today, whenever there's ice clinking in a glass, I get a ice cold fear over myself. But I've learned how to deal with it. And so you probably wouldn't even notice that I'm having a trigger when it happens, because I see it coming and I do the work that I need to do in order to stay calm and realize that it's just ice in a glass. It is not dangerous. But you have to find your triggers in order to manage them. Other flashbacks are more difficult. So for me, they're more difficult. That one is easy for me because I just laugh at myself for being afraid of ice in a glass. But you can have triggers where you can you actually are in the past and the present at the same time. So your mind is flashing the memory. You're seeing it happening before your eyes, and you're in the present at the same time, and it's extremely scary. So you're not in control of how you're behaving. You are reacting rather than responding. And the only way to get past that is to get through it. You have to learn your triggers. And most of us, what we do is we have occasions like that where we're triggered or we flashbacks, those kind of things, and we try to stop them. And it's actually the worst thing that you can do, because you never process it if you keep stopping it. And what happens is you build one bad reaction on top of another. You start being scared of places and different types of music. You start making your triggers other people's problem when your triggers are yours to deal with. So I think it's really important that people understand that often survivors behave in ways that are irrational because that's exactly what they are. They are responses to something that is pretty normal that remind you of a really, really horrible thing that happened in your past. So emotional responses to flashbacks and memories can be extremely difficult because you don't know why you're behaving in such an emotionally charged way to something really small. And to work through those things, you have to be able to be mindful. You can't be mindful when you're triggered, because when you are triggered, you're living in reaction, not in response. You are in fight or flight or freeze mode, and you're not thinking. You have to put your brain back on, if that's the best way of putting it that I can think of. You have to switch your brain back on in order to respond logically and to react normally to situations that are not dangerous to you. And that takes time and effort because you have to learn the techniques. So let's talk a little bit about trust. So the first thing that goes when you've been abused, especially if you've had childhood abuse and then other forms of abuse after that, is that you have huge trust issues. Not only do you not trust other people, you don't even trust yourself. And so it creates push and pull in relationships. It affects all your relationships because you can go one of two ways. Either you become extremely trusting, making really bad decisions, trusting people that you shouldn't, or you don't trust anyone. And both of those are bad responses, because somewhere in the middle of that is a normal way of looking at life, if you want to put it that way, because I hate the word normal, but because normal is relative. But there's a more balanced way of looking at life where you know that you stand a 50-50 chance of being done in, but you take the chance when the chance is worth it. But trust is one of the first things that go, because you lose your faith in humanity, maybe. You lose your faith in safety, and you know for a fact that life isn't fair anymore, because life is never fair, and it's the biggest mistake we teach our children is fairness, because you get out into the adult world and there isn't a fair. There isn't. The world is chaotic. There isn't a fair. And what happens is you start to isolate yourself, because it's easier to just not be involved with anyone than it is to negotiate the difficulty that relationships become when you don't have a yardstick for what a balanced relationship looks like. So isolation is one of the major problems that we have as survivors. But the other problem is that we crave connection. So often we make connections with wrong people, or we become people pleasers because we crave connection, but we're afraid of everything. We also overthink. And when we're overthinking, we come up with the worst case scenario. Boy, let me tell you, we can see things into a situation that don't even exist. Start reading into situations what other people's intentions are, when we're basing it on our experience, and probably it has nothing to do with the other person, because we're reading all of this stuff in based on how we feel, not based on the truth of a situation. So it can create a lot of problems, because you start reading into things a whole bunch of intention that another person probably never even had. We have difficulty communicating that. And we try to control things, try to control our environment, what's happening to us, where we're going, what we're doing, in order to feel safe. But actually what it does is, just because we're focusing on it so hard, it just makes things even worse. One of the other fallouts that we have is anxiety. So our anxiety doesn't switch off. It's just constantly on. It's like your anxiety, your depression, your survival instincts, they all never switch off. So you are running on a level that is unhealthy and feeds into all sorts of parts of your life. So you can have this intense emotion and then periods of numbness and disconnection. So if you have dissociation disorder like I do, then it can be extremely difficult, because at times when people are expecting you to have emotion, you have none. And at times when you should have balanced emotion, you're overwhelmed and you are behaving in emotionally overloaded ways. It's very difficult to balance your dissociation and disconnection with a balanced kind of emotion. It's like when you're feeling, you feel things way too much or not at all. And those are just part of it, because added to that, there's shame and guilt and self-blame. Because generally speaking, if you've had long-term abuse or childhood abuse, what you've had is a whole period of time when you have been brainwashed into thinking that you're worthless or that everything is your fault. You have been taught that you are not worthy. And so that voice is in your head all the time. And it creates this feeling inside of you that you pass on into your current life, that you are less. And basically what you do is, even if you're out of the situation or even if you've grown up, the power still lies with your abusers, because you're just finishing the work that they started. I think one of the harder ones for me is learning how to know who you are, reclaiming your identity. Because after you've been in a traumatic event, and when you're suffering from trauma, often you don't know who you are anymore. A lot of people want to go back to who they were before. So, I mean, my abuse started when I was 11 years old. So there's no way of going back. I was a child. I don't know who I was supposed to be. So when I was starting to reclaim my identity, I didn't even know what that was. I had to figure it out. I had to start over again with, what kind of coffee do I like? What kind of music do I like listening to? Because part of my fallout was that I used to just fit in with whatever crowd I was in. I didn't have my own likes and dislikes or my own personality. I just become like whoever I was with. And I had to learn that the hard way, one thing at a time. So I didn't just lose myself, because I never did find myself in the first place. I never knew who I was. So survival mode becomes your normal. And you struggle to rest and you feel unsafe all the time. And when you're feeling unsafe, one of the things that heightens is your anger. So I remember in my early 20s, into my 30s, I had a huge amount of anger that was undirected, and I didn't know what it was about. I didn't realize that the anger was the loss of my innocence, the loss of growing up in a way that was healthy. I didn't understand that my anger was directed at everything that had been stolen from me, and not at one particular person, because I had more than one abuser. Your anger is out of proportion. A small thing will make you lose your temper in a way that's unreasonable. It's like you've got this iceberg underneath the water, this built up explosion, and any little thing will trigger it. And unless you learn to trace where your anger comes from, that anger will fall out into your life, and is often why you'll see survivors behaving badly, and where the saying, I think, broken people break people, come from, is because you have misdirected anger. It's also very difficult to concentrate and stay present because your mind is overactive and you're always going through things and trying to protect yourself from being hurt again, which is practically impossible. You suffer with gaps in your memory, and sometimes you have brain fog. And those are also fallout from being abused. So if I look at my childhood, I have huge gaps in my childhood. And in my 13 years of domestic violence, as an adult, I have huge gaps in that as well. Sometimes someone will say something to me and it'll trigger a new memory. And I've been out of those situations for a very long time. But sometimes something new comes up and I have to work on it from scratch again. That's not failing. That's just not knowing there was a problem there. And you have to learn how to handle all of those things. So the physical symptoms with no clear cause are a very difficult thing to deal with as well, because you don't understand them. You have physical symptoms that don't relate to anything, which can also cause things like addictions, right? You you look for ways to hide your pain. So I was a comfort eater for many, many years. But not only was I a comfort eater, I was eating completely the wrong kind of food for my system. And I had no idea. I just started to think that I was going to be like that my whole life. And only after my childhood abuser passed away and I got sick from prediabetes and changed my diet did I start to change in a way that was fully healing from my childhood abuse. And I don't say I'm fully healed, but I'm working on it, because I suddenly started to realize that I had found it comfortable in being overweight because it protected me from many things. And that's one of the things that can happen as fallout of sexual abuse. Burnout from constant internal stress and feeling misunderstood by others is a common thing among survivors, because a lot of us are high functioning on the outside. We are overachievers, but struggling on the inside and hiding it by being involved in all sorts of things that just ease our pain because they distract us from looking straight at it. It creates in us a fear of being a burden. So we are functioning in order to be self-sufficient, but we're self-sufficient in a way that is unsustainable. We avoid people, places, conversations. We want to heal, but we're afraid of healing because we're in a comfortable uncomfortable. We know the devil we're dealing with, and so that becomes easier for us than to heal. But when you get tired of being strong all the time, and you realize there's another way of living, that there's life after this, that you can actually move forward, that you can actually change these survival instincts that you've built up over years, then things start to change. So all of these things, difficulties in relationships, finding it hard to deal with everyday life, depression, anxiety, dissociation, ill health, health disorders like stomach ailments, anxiety, depression, all those kind of fallouts from your childhood or your domestic violence, different forms of abuse. All of these things can be dealt with, but you have to learn how. And talking about it and just journaling isn't enough. You have to actually learn skills of how to process. So processing things in a way that makes sense. Processing them so that you can integrate them and let them go one thing at a time is the way to get through your trauma responses. The thing that I think if you can walk away with tonight after, or today, whenever you're watching this, if you can walk away with an understanding that you are not trapped and you are not stuck, and there are many ways to deal with your fallout. If you can walk away with that, if you can say there's life after this, if you can see that you aren't alone, then you're winning. The question is not, do you have fallout? The question is, are you brave enough to face your fallout and build a better life for you? If this meant anything to you, if it touched you or made you learn and grow, then maybe you want to like, follow, or share it with someone who might need it. I'll see you next week. Be brave enough.